Hi everyone, today I'm going to show you how to avoid noisy footage within your smartphone filmmaking, how to get nice clean images so you don't have that kind of grainy noise effect in the shadows, the highlights, that kind of thing, and how best to tackle it when we're in tricky situations. I'll be using Filmic Pro. If you've got any other smartphone filmmaking app, then it'll be more or less the same for that as well. And if you don't have one, I suggest that you get one right now. Also, apologies if the audio is a little bit echoey. I've just moved into a new flat, so the audio is bouncing around everywhere. It is what it is. Let's get into it. Okay, so let's assume you've got your 24 frames per second for filmmaking matched in the 180 shutter speed rule with your 1/48 shutter speed. You've locked your shutter speed, tapped it red on Filmic Pro or whatever your app is, and you've got that locked in. Now I'm not going to start exposing the outside windows because that's not what this video is about. We're looking at noisy footage and how to get the cleanest image possible. Now the first thing I would look at is your focus, if your subject is in perfect focus or not, because that will obviously add some noise to your footage and it will make it unclear. Now the first go-to clearly would be the reticule, so if you tap on a screen here, we've got the reticule, we'll put that over the face there. But the main thing to do, if we go into the focus wheel here, is to change this. So if we go down, we're bringing that focus towards us, and that is really sharp, really clear. If we go a bit too far, you'll see it gets slightly blurred. And it's always worth double checking your focus before you shoot. I've done this a few times where I've created a shot, thought it looks really well in focus, and I get it back in editing and it was just out of focus for some reason. So really take the time to double check your focus because that will add noise to your footage as well. And it's a really easy one to fix, so it's best to fix this in shot. Something else you can do to clear up the focus, which will add noise and take away noise, is go to your live analytics. So if you've got A on the bottom left here, tap that, and on the right hand side of the options at the top here, we've got FP, which is focus peaking. So if we tap on that, that will tell us exactly, using these green highlight areas, to tell us exactly what is in focus the most, what is peaking in focus. So again, we can bring that focus towards us. You can see the green lines fading away or away from us, and you can see that green really all over the figure here. So we've got nice sharp focus. It's not always 100% bulletproof, this kind of tactic, but in general it does work really, really well. So if we tap off screen, we've got a really nice clean focus on our subject. So that's the first way to make sure that you get nice clean footage and get rid of noise. If you've got noise in your subject, that's going to be really difficult for the audience to focus if the camera itself isn't in focus. Don't adjust the brightness on your device that you're watching this through. This is purposely dark. Now, the reason being is that the second thing, and perhaps the most important thing you want to look at in terms of your settings to give yourself a nice clean image and avoid that horrible noise in your smartphone filmmaking, is the ISO number. Now ISO is separate to exposure, they're completely different things. So exposure exposes for your highlights, so if you've got a window in the background, that kind of thing, you want to make sure that's nice and clear through the window perhaps. Whereas ISO actually just brightens the image you already have. So for example, if you look at the audio bar here on the bottom of the screen, if I slide it and I continue to talk, that gets lower and lower and lower, and my voice will get lower and lower and lower. But as I raise it higher and higher and higher, the voice gets higher too. Now with the ISO, it does exactly the same thing, but with the brightness of your image. So it's nothing to do with exposure, it will just brighten up. And in doing so, the brighter you make it, the more noise you're going to start introducing to your image. So you want to keep that ISO at its base level. For smartphones, the base level on Filmic Pro, for me at least, is 22. So you want to keep it at that, but this isn't the kind of brightness that we want this image to be. We want to have it brighter. So if we make it brighter using the ISO and start to raise it, you'll see as we start to raise it, this looks kind of normal now, but even on the laptop we're starting to get some noise. And if you raise it even more so to make it nice and bright, you can see it, say, let's go to 300 for example, all the way up there. It looks really well exposed in terms of like the word, the white, the character, all that kind of stuff, but when you look really closely at the laptop, we're starting to get quite a bit of noise there, and that's only going to increase the more we increase the ISO number. So we want to keep that ISO at least below 100. So if we drag that below 100 now, just like that, this is the kind of set bar that you want to keep your ISO below. You don't want to set the ISO above 100 because then the noise will really get too much and you'll get a lot of grainy kind of imaging in your shadow areas. And when it's too high, you'll get noise even in like the wood beams here, that kind of stuff. It will be everywhere and it will give you really unclear, horrible footage. So really what you want to aim for is the base number for your ISO, which is 22. But as I said, this is too dark really for the kind of image that I want and what most people will want. Okay, so we've established that this lighting isn't good enough for our image and we want to keep that ISO at its base level. So what we're going to do now is add an LED light. Now obviously if you're lighting a full-size person, you're going to need bigger lights or to be able to do a few more different things and have a few more lights. But right now we're just going to practice and show you how a light can affect and help you get a nice clean image. Obviously that's way too bright right now in front of the character. You would never do that. But if you pull it away so it looks like maybe the sunshine is coming from the top left here, we can now see that the base ISO is so low that we're actually got a really nice clean image now. So the more light you pump it in, the better chance you have of getting your ISO as low as possible, which in turn gives you the least amount of noise in your footage and the highest quality image that you can get. So the lower your ISO is, i.e. the base level mixed with decent lighting, that means you'll have the highest quality image and the least amount of noise in your smartphone footage. Let's say you're filming on location and it's a nighttime shot, so there's very, very little light in the shot at all. The one thing you don't want to do with this is to bring your ISO up too much. You don't want to force a high ISO in a nighttime setting. So if we bring up the ISO from its base level, let's say we just bring it up to 100, which normally would be okay for a lot of shots. It's already incredibly noisy. And if we adjust the focus here, even with that level of noise and that focus sharpness, it still looks really, really bad. So under 100 in nighttime conditions, it just doesn't work. So don't force a high ISO number in nighttime conditions. You'll have to pump in more light one way or another to make it work. I found this out through Plant Lady, a short film that I made. I had a lot of shots, probably about 2 or 3 actually, that I really, really loved. But then when I looked at it back, the noise levels were quite high in a lot of areas in the shadows and things like that. If I'd had more lights at the time, I would have fixed that. But it's something to think about when you're filming, because if you're filming at night time and you bring the ISO up too high, it's going to really ruin that image for you no matter what work you put into it. So again, talking about lighting, you can have a practical light like this, or you can pump in more light with a LED panel light, as I showed you earlier on, to make sure that your ISO stays nice and low and you get a much, much cleaner image. You can see there's no noise, or very little noise in there whatsoever, compared to if we have it right up here at 100 and you look in the shadows and there's a lot of noise there. So don't force the ISO too high. Make sure you keep it as low as you can and pump light in so you can keep that ISO nice and low. Again, I cannot reiterate that enough. Lastly, something that is quite debatable amongst smartphone filmmakers is whether profiles make a difference to the noise in your footage. Now, if you go to the bottom left here in Filmic Pro, and we go into the cinematographer kit, which is an additional price for Filmic Pro, you've got dynamic here, which I think I used once in my last video, which was for filming underwater, which bizarrely helped. But otherwise, the main ones you want to be thinking about if you're not going to film in natural is flat and log V2, or if you've got one of the newer models of phones, log V3. Now, the reason being is that it saves a lot of detail in the shadows, or at least that's the idea. So that in turn can help you with noise levels and also a lot with color grading. That's the main thing really, is color grading, but it can help with noise levels. So with flat, it will save some detail on shadows, and the idea is that log will save even more detail on the shadows. So when you're color grading, you can save a lot more detail in those areas. Now for me, I tend to film in flat when it comes to smartphone films, although my last short film, Lucky the Dog, I filmed in natural and it actually looked really good. So it depends on what kind of detail you want to go into with color grading as well, and how much detail you want to work in for noise levels. But that's something else you can think about too. But I wouldn't worry too much about that. That's just like an additional option if you want to go into that as well. Thank you so much for watching this video, guys. I hope you've enjoyed it a lot. If you have learned something from this, then do let me know what it was down below in the comments section. Don't forget, I've got lots of Filmic Pro tutorials, short films you can watch, and videos on smartphone filmmaking tips like this, as well as accessory videos and how to use them to the best of your advantage. So if that sounds of any interest to you, hit the subscribe button. I'll see you on the next one. Take care. Bye bye.